Good morning. Good morning and welcome to this online policy dialogue on the current situation in Slovakia and the country's growing illiberal and pro-Russian stance under the government of Prime Minister Robert Fico. Today, anti-government protests will take place across Slovakia for the second time this year. Similar protests 2 weeks ago rallied more than 100,000 people, including in smaller towns where political demonstrations are unusual, and more are expected today. Protesters want to defend Slovakia's belonging to the EU and NATO and express support to democratic values. The protest movement was triggered by a visit of Robert Fico to Moscow last December. His meeting there with Vladimir Putin, which was against the EU's direct decision not to meet Russian officials, was made public only after it took place. It was officially about security supply of Russian gas after Ukraine's decision to put an end to the transit of Russian gas through its territory, but questions remain over what was exactly discussed. Since he came back for a third term as Prime Minister in October 2023, Fico has propagated Russian disinformation narratives about the war in Ukraine, stopped military aid to Ukraine, blamed EU and NATO countries for the war, and said that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was an enemy. He said that he would support Ukraine's accession to the EU, but that he would prevent it from joining NATO. Following the Moscow meeting, Slovak media reported that seasoned diplomats and individuals with strong Euro-Atlantic views in Bratislava were being systematically removed and often replaced with graduates of Russian universities. Foreign Minister Juraj himself met his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov several times in the past year. The anti-government movement is also motivated by Slovakia's internal situation. When it came to power, one of the first decisions of Fico's government was to dismantle the Special Prosecutor's Office and revise the criminal code. This helped clear several of Fico's associates of charges of corruption and other crimes. The government also abolished the public radio television and replaced it with a new body with more political control over it. In recent months, it intensified its pressure on the judiciary, media, cultural institutions, civil society organizations, and opposition parties. But the governing coalition is also under pressure. In January, it lost its majority in parliament. Opposition parties accuse it of undermining Slovakia's EU membership. And in return, Fico accused opponents of preparing a so-called Slovak Maidan, that is to say, preparing a coup with a violent protest. So, where is Slovakia heading? Can Robert Fico maintain his grip on power? And will he do so by going further into illiberal policies? Is the pro-Russian diplomacy leading Slovakia further away from its NATO and EU partners? And indeed, is it a risk for European security? We will try to understand all of this with our speakers today. First, Rastislav Káčer. You were Foreign Minister of Slovakia in a previous government from 2022 to 2023 when Robert Fico was out of power. Before that, you served as ambassador to several countries, including Hungary and the US, as well as Defense State Secretary in charge of negotiating Slovakia's accession to NATO. You are also a co-founder of the Globsec think tank in Bratislava. Katarína Batková, you are executive director of Iuris, a Slovak organization that defends and promotes the rule of law, supports citizens in their participation in public life, and supports them in access to justice. We also have my colleague Juraj Majcin, a policy analyst here at the European Policy Center. You are an expert in defense and security issues, and you also have an experience in Slovak diplomacy. But first, I will turn to Ivan Novotny. Ivan, you have a first-hand experience of how Slovakia's diplomacy works under Robert Fico, because until last November, you were a member of the cabinet of Foreign Minister Blanár before being suddenly dismissed. Can you tell us what happened and what you witnessed working with the minister from about Slovak's diplomacy under Fico and Blana. So, Ivan, can you please start this discussion with an insider's testimony? Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Eric. And I would like to thank for opportunity to speak today about these very pressing and concerning issues. And from your summary, Eric, I think it's very clear that these issues and direction that Slovakia is headed should be also of a concern to the EU and its member states. So I think it's very important that we are talking about it today. And I still am optimist, and I think that there are still ways to change that direction. But more to the topic, yes, I was working for the ministry for 5 or 6 years with a short break. But for the last year and a half, I worked at the office of the minister. First, it was Minister Vlachovský, but then it was for over a year at the Minister Blanar's office. It's just to give a context, it's a very small team. It's comprised of 5 to 6 people. My responsibilities were comprised also of a government cabinet meeting agenda, but then it was Middle East, security policy, and international law. So it was definitely a change when Smer party came into power, and we all faced with the dilemma because we knew that their policy program was different, and that the change would come. But we decided to stay on because we were professional, and we felt, and there are still inside the foreign service that feel that it's very important to help Slovakia from inside the institution. So I think that it was very important. However, or another way how to look at my 1 year with Banar is that I was witness to what happened there, and the things that I've seen were even not maybe concerning is a weak word, but they were quite shocking. So to me, what was and to my other colleagues, what was always very difficult to understand why we are doing certain steps that make no logical sense from all kinds of angles that you want to look at it. If it's foreign policy, if it's security policy. So what I want to say that there were steps taken by Minister Blanar, directed by Prime Minister Fico, that were not implicitly or explicitly in interest of Slovakia. That goes for some votings in the United Nations General Assembly. For example, it was about constitution or establishing remembrance days for Srebrenica genocide. That was an initiative of Rwanda and Germany in the UN. And Serbia was heading or was campaigning very much not to have that day established. And Slovakia is a traditional ally of fighting against impunity and being a very, very good friend of International Criminal Court. We were suddenly abstaining from that votes. And even though all the teams and all the diplomats and high management of the ministry was advising minister against that, and they were explaining to him that there are only losses for us from such a move, and that it will actually weaken our position in the international arena. However, he had his task from the office of the government, presumably. And such examples can be found on a weekly and monthly basis. What was also concerning that our bilateral relations with traditional allies were completely going south, if I can say that. They were very, very limited. And what is of a more concern, Minister Blanar has not visited Warsaw and Kiev. He has been minister for a year and a half, and he has not visited our two biggest neighbors. The neighbors are going to stay, whatever the policies and other circumstances are. So, and Polish minister was not in Bratislava. The minister Kuleba has visited Bratislava on a working visit, but it was a short half-day trip. But anyway, what I wanted to try to say that our traditional allies were being ignored, and relationships not kept on a basis that is absolutely essential. And on the other hand, we were trying to make these new connections with countries like Brazil, China, Indonesia, Serbia, Russia, that were in no way understandable for us, because in order to establish some links of value that we already have with our allies, it's just simply not in power of our small foreign service. So those steps were we never got answers for them, and we started then speculating what it is about. After the purge came in November, I gave an interview to Slovak newspapers, and I said there an idea that a reason why those new connections with other BRICS countries and more illiberal states were made, that maybe it's a backup for potential non-EU presence of Slovakia. And I remember in December it was something that I was laughed at, and people were saying that I completely crossed the line, that it's something that is a fictional scenario to even imagine Slovakia being outside of EU. That was December. It was beginning of December. Now we have beginning of February, and a discussion about fear of leaving Slovakia from EU is a mainstream topic in Slovakia. It's crazy, and I have to say that word, but that's how we moved from 2 months.
And did you hear or did you see specific elements showing that the foreign minister or the prime minister were consciously trying to shift the alliance of Slovakia? Did they say some things in meetings that it was a new real strategy, or is it something that you saw behind different kinds of actions without being clear even from the inside?
They are being very careful about what they say in front of who they say stuff. So no, they are always very, very cautious, and they always confirm our Euro and Atlantic connections. Maybe that's one of the things I want to emphasize for Brussels audience. Maybe it's like a general advice from me. Assess what they do, not what they say. Disinformation and lying is unfortunately a very common method of the current government. So they are rhetorically confirming and rejecting any EU exit thoughts, but unfortunately, what they do is on the contrary. But to be more specific about your question, Eric. It is more of this general feeling that whenever we were discussing initiatives brought by the Western allies or Western partners, the sort of antipathy or this skepticism towards that was always present. Whenever was something presented by China or Russia or Hungary, that is basic. That is. Like Russia, we can say, because they were the Hungarian proposals usually were pre-discussed with Russia, or that was our feeling. There was general enthusiasm, and we were always tasked to work more implicitly, or the priority was always given to the stuff that was brought by the non-EU, non-Western allies.
Well, thank you very much, Ivan, for this insider's witness account. That's a very good example of what's happening and a very good basis for our discussion. So thank you for joining us.
Eric, can I have one more sentence?
Sure.
I just want to say that, as I said in the beginning, that the direction we are heading is not good at all, but it's still not lost. And what I would like to ask from all people in Brussels is to stay engaged. I think it's very important to support our fight for democracy and care about what is happening in Slovakia. So thank you for doing this dialogue, and it's hugely appreciated.
Thank you very much, Ivan. And now I will turn to Rastislav Káčer. So you have the experience also from Slovak diplomacy in the long term. Listening to what Ivan Novotny just said, what is your assessment of what we are seeing? And I would ask you more precisely, how deep is the engagement from Robert Fico and the Minister Blana with Russia? How far are they ready to go, and what are the reasons for that?
Well, involvement with Slovak diplomacy is all of my adult life, and I'm quite old. When you look at that, I'll be 60 this year. So it's over half of my life I'm dedicated to Slovak diplomacy, Slovak foreign policy, and Slovak security policy. It's quite substantial time. I have to tell you that the erosion what we are witnessing today in Slovakia is unseen and unmatched in all of my professional career. We got some hard days in early 90s when Prime Minister Mečiar at the time was trying to blackmail the Western allies that if you don't invite Slovakia, this was before NATO summit in 1997 in Madrid. So if you don't invite Slovakia, we have the option, we will turn east. But overall situation was less dire at the time because I think that the overall atmosphere in the Slovak society was very pro-European, very pro-Atlantic. When we measured the public opinion views in the early 90s and throughout all of the 90s, Slovakia was in the region one of the most pro-European countries. And it remained so until, well, in the mid-2000s. And I would say until the all hybrid and disinformation campaign from Russia started. Things changed with Prime Minister Fico somewhere, when this was 2018, when was the assassination of journalist and his fiancée, Mr. Kuciak. When Fico got under heavy pressure from the society, he turned bitter, and I think this marked his transformation into, and it was probably a combination of many other factors, into openly pro-Russian and authoritarian aspiring politician. Before that, if you would look into, in particular, the second incarnation of Prime Minister Fico, he was very much pro-European core. He was even very critical at the time of Viktor Orban, who was more Eurosceptical. So we had an incarnation of Robert Fico somewhere in the middle of his political career, in which he wanted too much Germany, France, the engine of Europe. He wanted to be, as our Eurozone country, to be in the middle of new European transformation. It would be hard, and this is no time to discuss why he turned this way, but reality of today, what we need to say, that Robert Fico is an ally of Mr. Putin, he is ally of Viktor Orban, and he wants to do everything to erode and to drive the wedge into European unity. I'm not going to say what he is saying. It's easy to Google out. If you would look what he's been saying for the last 2 years, not only since he took power, this is all the Kremlin propaganda rubbish. Whatever is his public opinion, he likes to do videos. If someone is patient enough to translate those, but a number of those has been translated, all of his popular videos, some of them turned on mysterious places, God knows where. One of those we found that he was done in the famous Vietnam apartment with golden, whatever is the bathroom, golden bath.
Yeah, just after his visit to Moscow.
Yes. And we will come back to this visit in Moscow. So all of that, what he's saying, all of that, every public appearance, it's trashing the Western allies, it's trashing the principles on which our Western world is based. It's portraying the West like we are not part of that. It's something alien. It's strange. It's not good for Slovakia. It's all the time trashing Brussels as a symbol of evil, and all the time speaking very nicely of Moscow and his friend down in South, Viktor Orban. And when you would look, as Ivan was saying, what are the contacts? Who is he meeting? Where he travels? What foreign minister is doing? This is only stretching hands towards the coalition of the world autocrats and villains. So what he's been doing, and Ivan was right that he's very careful about the language which he's using, so not to give Slovak public opinion the impression he wants to truly leave the EU and the Western institutions, because still majority of people is there, but his actions are completely opposite. But we need to say that also the public opinion shifts. Since we have this heavy artillery of Russian propaganda, heavy artillery of Russian info war and hybrid operations, even not the hybrid operations, but direct intelligence operations in Slovakia, including political corruption and including classical disinformation campaign, we see the shift in Slovak society. And as I mentioned that in 90s and in the first 2 quarters of 2000, Slovak population was absolutely pro-European, probably the most pro-European country of all, much more pro-European, for example, than Czechs, who were always slightly Eurosceptical. You know, this Czech, almost like British-like Euroscepticism. But Slovakia is turning. When you would look at the last report produced by Globsec last year, Slovaks are shifting, Hungarians are shifting. Both of us, we were strongly pro-European. So these words, they mean action. And I often quote these in a Sunday prayer, the act of penitence, when we say, where we ask the Lord to forgive us our sins, which we committed by our thoughts, by our words, by our deeds, and for failing to do things. That is happening. These words, they mean a lot. So I would only support for what Ivan was saying in his arguments that Fico might be cautious, saying, oh, we don't want to leave the EU, we don't want to leave NATO, this is our space. But I'll give you an example. This is like you were in a serious relationship. This is like if I was married. And I would say, of course, that relationship, it's important and it creates overall best frame for my life. But immediately I would keep trashing my partner. I would keep trashing that institution of the marriage and partnership. I'll be speaking only bad things. I won't be coming home. I will do completely untransparent handlings of my income. I would never care about my partner. But then again, if I'm accused that, you know, like what you do, do you want to quit or, what do you say? No, I'm all in. This is relationship means a lot to me. You're going to kill that. It's going to die. And this is precisely what Viktor Orbán has been doing for years, slowly, like cooking the frog. But Fico, we see it fast, forward action. He wants to kill the spirit of Europeanism. He wants to kill all the values on which the European project is based. He wants to kill all the trust of NATO allies in Slovakia. So then actually our engagement will be of no value. And the last thing I want to say and directly respond to your initial question, he is involved with Russia. If he is not a direct Russian agent, he behaves like. That is this English saying, if you look like a duck, if you walk like a duck, and blah, 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 you probably are a duck. He behaves like an agent of Russian intelligence. A lot of people around him behave. We should say this is not about Mr. Fico, that he is a Russian agent on his own. He's got 79 members of the parliament who are majority, who vote and who support him in this endeavor. He's got 16 members of government who support him in this action. He's got the president who is supporting him all of his action. So this is not about Mr. Fico. This is about a kind of a sick cabal. And when he's speaking about coup d'etat, we see it happening. We see Mr. Fico capturing the state institutions, turning the penal code, turning the laws, turning the rules, crippling the institutions, firing the people, not only from foreign ministry and foreign service, but whatever institution in the government you look at, it's all like a raid on Genghis Khan hordes it's raping the country. So we see life coup d'etat happening, but unfortunately, this is coup d'etat happening that is pulling Slovakia out of Europe, where we always belonged, And he's turning this for kind of weird authoritarian regime, which is extremely dangerous. Last sentence, this should be taken seriously. I think it's underestimated, and I think it's still taken lightly because people will still think, well, that could not happen. That is not that serious. And we always tend to say, oh, Putin didn't mean it. Donald Trump doesn't mean it. It's not going to be that bad. Robert Fico, oh, it doesn't mean that. And then we are up to our neck in the hell, and that's it.
Well, that's very clear. Thank you very much. Juraj, seen from Brussels, how does this, everything that was explained before, how does this translate into Slovakia's behavior within the EU and within NATO? And how do you see that? Is what Fico and the people supporting him, because of course he's not alone, as Rastislav said, is it translated into acts that go against the EU's and NATO's interest? Did you see any decisions or behaviors that would go into that direction?
Thank you, Eric. And I also would like to echo what Ivan has said. Fico is very cautious about his rhetoric, especially on international fora, like in Brussels, for instance. So, as Minister Káčer said, he always says EU and NATO are our indispensable environment as something that is sacrosanct for us. But in the end, if you look into the actions, especially now when important discussions are going on the future of European defense, you see coalitions of the willing forming around the countries in the Baltics, but also within the EU and NATO. You see Fico, as Ivan has said, meeting these actions with not only with skepticism but also with almost with sabotage, as his approach to things. So, for instance, this weekend we will see Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia celebrating the disconnecting from the old Soviet era electrical grid. And in Bratislava, you see Prime Minister Fico vehemently advocating for coming back to the Russia's gas, which goes against EU's policy of being independent from Russia's gas supplies, because Moscow has always used these supplies as a weapon in its geopolitical struggles. This week, there was an informal summit on European defense called by Council President Costa, and you see Prime Minister Fico not even attending dinner with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. That was meant to spearhead the closer EU-UK defense cooperation on the NATO front. We had big speech of Mark Rutte with a few weeks ago, addressing specifically citizens of the alliance, saying we need to invest more to defense, especially given Russia's threat, but also Donald Trump asked us to spend more, which is understandable. We have to do 3%. And again, Prime Minister Fico says, no, we won't be doing it. As Minister Káčer said, we won't be doing that only if it's dual use, meaning hospitals, roads. And we know that what NATO asks Slovakia to do is to put up a mechanized brigade, which is something is difficult to do with hospitals and roads only. On the front of candidate countries or European foreign and security policy, you see sanctions against the officials behind repression of protests in Georgia, vetoed by Hungarian and Slovak governments. Now, recently, elections in Belarus, there was no statement condemning the election, which was, of course, not free and fair by Bratislava, but also Hungary, together with Slovakia, vetoed joint statement of the EU on Belarus. And when you can continue in these examples, so this is not only what Fico says, but it has clear repercussions in Brussels. So I would stop here. I think these examples are quite telling about.
Just one more question about sanctions against Russia, because there was no veto or threat of veto from Slovakia, which was seen as a sign of cooperation and moderation by Slovakia. given what everything has been said, and especially the link between Hungary, Orban's Hungary, and Fico Slovakia, how do you explain the fact that Slovakia supported sanctions up to now, and is there a risk that it could at some point replace or support Hungary as the opposing EU country on the sanctions issue?
This is indeed a question that I've been thinking a lot about, because it's true that that after Ukraine, rightfully so, I think, refused to renew the transit of gas from Russia via its territory to Slovakia, Robert Fico threatened not to continue the sanctions against Russia, which have to be renewed every 6 months under EU rules. Whether I know in the end, neither Hungary nor Slovakia vetoed the sanctions. Why he didn't do it. I think that might directly links with Moscow. We don't know. Maybe would have been too much, and the pressure of much stronger countries like France, like Germany, would be simply too high for a country like Slovakia to bear. That's why he retreated. He of course has to have some strategy, but maybe later on, we don't know what the instructions, maybe he receives from people around Orban. What's the state of play behind doors? What discussions are going there? So I would not want to get into some speculations, but it's something to keep an eye on, definitely in next 6 months.
Thanks, Juraj. We have a few questions in the Q&A, so I will take them after listening to Katarína Batková, but we will try to find the time to address them. So, Katarína, we've spoken a lot about the external dimension of this authoritarian illiberal stance by the government, but also I think what we understood from what Mr. Káčer said is that there are links between the attitude on foreign policy, defense and security, and also the internal pressures on civil society, opposition, and of course the protest of today also linked the two dimensions. So what is the state of play of this violation of rule of law, and how do you see the link between being closer to Russia, closer to Hungary, Orban's Hungary, and being more authoritarian domestically?
Thank you very much for having me. First thing I want to say is to support the gentleman speaking before me by the thing that didn't brought very much attention now, but I think especially for Brussels and for the EU, it's important. Mr. Fico introduced, I think 2 weeks ago, a constitutional amendment. Which also concerning the EU law and how the EU law is implemented in Slovakia, because he introduced that he wants to secure by the constitutional amendment that our constitution will be above the European Union law. But when you see how is the wording of this amendment actually written down, is that it is an it is in a way distracting the core principle of EU law, the supremacy or the principle of primacy of EU law, because how it is written down is that this constitutional amendment can also broad the situation when some of the EU law can be not in accordance with our constitution, and according to our constitution or this amendment introduced by Mr. Fico, this EU law would not have been not have the power of primacy over like basic legislation.
So that means Slovakia could decide not to apply EU legislation and would be out of the legal order of
exactly.
the EU,
it is much harsher than the Polish case when the Polish Constitutional Court decided that some of the principles or some of the parts of the EU legislation should not apply by the courts. But this is even harsh because it will be amended to the Constitution, so the Constitution will prevail over the EU law. But in some cases, it can over prevail the general legislation in Slovakia, and this is something what gentlemen were speaking about, that it is a concrete step of how to weaken the EU legislation inside Slovakia. And it didn't brought very much attention for two reasons. Because the reasons that Mr. Fico gave publicly were not in accordance with the actual written amendment. So he lied publicly that this is only to secure the supremacy of the constitution. And secondly, which is more political reason, is that he don't have a constitutional majority in the parliament. So probably this will not pass. But even thinking about something like weakening the principle of primacy of EU law, I think it threatens the core integration of Slovakia into the EU. So I wanted to start to draw the attention to this because I think it's important, and it is not even discussed in Slovakia for now, because of the political situation and because of the protests and all the other stuff what's happening in Slovakia that I will speak about. But I think this is important because this is a concrete step of weakening the EU legislation inside Slovakia, as the Polish Constitutional Court does. So let's go to media. There was a change in the legislation governing the public broadcaster, and we can see that there were the politicians were not able to decide on the members of the council of this public broadcaster to vote for regular director, but still we can see changed in how the political debates are done inside the public broadcaster, and who the public broadcaster actually picks as his experts to the news and so on. So there is a shift, there is definitely a change to more pro-governmental or not so confrontational way of broadcasting within the public broadcaster. Then we have a complete destruction of the cultural institutions like Slovak National Gallery. I think 3 weeks ago or 1 month ago, 100 of the most important employees, experts, announced that they are leaving the Slovak National Gallery because of the nominee of Minister of Culture for the interim director. Because the destruction inside the gallery and the situation inside the gallery is so pressing to them. And there were also changes to the fund for funding a culture all around Slovakia, and for example, all the LGBT plus projects were excluded from the funding from this fund. So there are influences on what culture or what cultural events or cultural organization will be supported, and it has a great impact also on the NGOs working in a culture. So we can see that the threat and verbal, financial, and even legislative threats toward NGO, basically from the beginning of this government. The first thing Mr. Fico said on his when the programming document was introduced, that now we will stop the influence of the foreign-funded NGOs in Slovak politics. And since then, there were several legislative attacks. There were foreign agent law introduced in May last year, and then it was changed to so-called lobbying legislation. But it was more muzzling law against the NGOs, because NGOs were basically they will be all the NGOs, not only the political, not only anti-corruption or human rights NGOs, but basically social, cultural, all the other NGOs will need to be registered as lobbyists, because the law was written like everything that they do, like social media post is a lobbying. yeah. But this lobbying legislation was not a proper lobbying legislation. It was concerning only the NGOs. So any other lobbyists, companies, businesses, banks, anyone would not have any obligations under this law, only the NGOs. So it was the second attempt. The legislation on the NGOs is still pending in the parliament. It was not approved and it was not pushed away. So we are trying to look forward on what's next. What will they bring to the table? I think in March or April at the session of the parliament. And you can see also the protests. The protests are driven by the very small NGO, like newly established. It calls Peace for Ukraine, because it was a reaction on the visit to Mr. Putin, but they are constantly growing. It is not actually the second time today that the protest will take place. It is a fourth or fifth protest since the visit of the Russia. And before the last protest, Mr. Fico actually came up with a conspiracy theory that which is completely false, that will be violent protests trying to overcome, like he tried to explain it like the attack on the Capitol, that something like this will happen in Slovakia, and it is prepared by NGOs and it is financed from abroad. And he continues with this conspiracy theory to bring up the Ukrainian services on a plate, together with the Georgian activists and people fighting on Ukraine on behalf of Georgia. So try to paint that there is some kind of plot against this government, and the NGOs and activists from all around Slovakia are trying to violently bring down the government. But it is not true. It is a completely conspiracy. But in this scenario, more than 100,000 people came 2 weeks ago to the 21 cities in Bratislava to say no, and to say that Slovakia is inside the EU and this is our future. And today it will be held in 41 cities all around Slovakia, and more 10 cities abroad, all around the world, where the Slovaks came to say that we are a part of the European Union.
And these accusations of violent protest, or is it just a way to try to decredibilize the opposition, the protest, or do you see signs that it could announce a kind of crackdown on civil society, the opposition? And are you worried by this kind of framing of the situation by the government?
We are worried because they already announced that there are some criminal proceedings going on. No one from the activists that I know, and we are a legal organization, so lots of the activists always turn on us to help them with the legal representation or legal help. No one was actually called to police to testimony, but they are running some criminal investigations, and they are always pushing this narrative through the disinformation media that there is some plot, that there is some plan to violent disregard or violent breakdown of this government. And so we are afraid. And I think people who came 2 weeks ago to the protest were a little bit afraid on what's going to happen, if there will be some provocation, or if the police will secure the security on the protest. But nothing violent happens in any of the places. And I think more and more people will come today to protest because they see that there is a safe place to come. And it was very calm. It was very it was in a good mood. You should be there, but the protests are very calm, and they are very pro-European and in a good mood, like in a positive way. So we can overturn this Fico government dragging us out of the EU and out of to the Russia. We don't want that as Slovak people.
Thank you very much. We have several interesting questions, and there are two of them that we could link. The first one is about the possibility of Andrej Babiš being re-elected or coming back as prime minister in Czech Republic, because there are elections in the autumn, I think. And Babiš is now an ally of Viktor Orbán in the Patriots for Europe group and party. So could there be a kind of triangle, coordinated attempt to pressure on the EU and to change or to prevent the EU from, supporting Ukraine, or to change the EU policies? But the second question is, should we regard Fico's rise to power as part of the wider trend of radical right parties? And this is interesting because Robert Fico is not officially a radical right parties. I think he was just suspended from the Socialist European Party, but not expelled, and he hasn't joined Orbán's party. So how do you see this, his links with Orbán, Babiš, and the radical right? Maybe Katarína, and if Juraj and Mr. Káčer want to answer after that.
I think it is part of the broader populists, far-right politicians gaining more and more power. I'm not a sociologist, I'm not a political analyst, I'm a lawyer, so I would not continue and leave the place for Mr. Káčer. But I think when I'm speaking to other organizations, I'm mostly speaking to NGOs in Poland, in Hungary and Czech Republic, and also in Romania, Croatia, and so on. I think these tendencies are very common with the common narratives. We can see introducing the anti-NGO legislation also in Romania. It was turned down, but it was introduced in Georgia. It is the same playbook to really discredit and to lower the trust towards the NGOs and towards active citizens, because they are core with the media. They are core of the democracy.
Thanks. I will ask the question to Rastislav Káčer, and also add in the picture the possibility of an FPÖ chancellor in Austria, which would mean that in a few months from now we would have in Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, and Austria a geographically coherent bloc of anti-European, pro-Russian prime ministers. So how do you see that perspective, Mr.
Well, first to Mr. Babiš, and then second to that cluster. Mr. Babiš, he likes very much Viktor Orbán. He's not that authoritarian as Mr. Fico. He's not that openly pro-Russian as Mr. Fico, that I would say, but he's more and more shifting towards the rhetoric, which is common for extreme right parties, and he also joined. Despite the certain level of shock in the Czech politics and in the number of his party ranks, he's joined this weird anti-European club. The thing is that I warned Czech friends about 1.5 years ago when Fico came to power that he and Mr. Orbán and Russia and their intelligence services, they will do everything to focus now on Czech Republic to pull it in the group which is more tolerant, at least, if not that openly pro-Russian. Because Mr. Fico, he's extreme. There is nobody else within the EU today who would be that openly and that aggressively pro-Russian like him. Viktor Orbán, he's been for a while, even longer than him, but Viktor Orbán is much smarter than Mr. Fico. Viktor Orbán keeps a little open door always, so he can turn at some point or play double game. I think he's a much more clever and more experienced politician. Mr. Fico goes all in. And I warn Czech friends that they will do two things. Probably not even to support Mr. Babiš, because that may harm Mr. Babiš. His constituency in Czech Republic is much wider. So open support by Mr. Orbán and open support by Mr. Fico can kill part of that constituency and harm him. Their role, it's not going to be that. Their role will be twofold. First, will be to trash current government, pro-European and quite modern government based on the values of democratic values. And we saw last week, Mr. Fico started to trash Mr. Fiala, confront him openly, and he's been trashing President Peter Pavel, who's got very clear values and clear stance. So his role will be to mud, to bias Czech politics and turn it against these leaders, which indirectly, of course, will help Mr. Babiš. But there will be big pull and big effort by Russian disinformation and intelligence to help those 5% parties, in particular Motoristi, which is anti-European, strongly Eurosceptical pro-Russian party, which got a high chance to be over 5% and a high chance to become part of a future government. But in particular, Mrs. Konečná, who is nicknamed Russian Matryoshka, who is a post-communist
Communist Party, right?
Yeah. It's a weird communist ranks, unusual in other EU countries, who is only spreading the hardcore Russian propaganda, and she also has got a chance to go over 5%, potentially Mr. Okamura. So if we see after elections those two parties like Motorista and Konečná well over 5%, let's say only 6%, Mr. Babiš close almost to 40 with the opinion polling, we will see almost constitutional majority for the government, which will be quite pro-Russian. So risk is here and it's happening. The focus was on Romania. We saw the heavy campaign to turn Romania from Atlanticism and to turn for more, if not open and pro-Russian, but more tolerant towards Russia. And now I'm aiming to the second question with FPÖ. The plan, the Russian plan, and it was spelled a couple of times publicly. Mr. Medvedev spoke on this. He even drew some maps on the wall in his presentation, how they imagine Europe. They're like EU and Europe fragmented, weakened and eroded. As a part of the plan, they'll see something in the middle of Europe, which will be based on footprint of what used to be the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which would be something between the West and the East, which will be pro-Russian, probably not completely out of the EU, because even when we spoke of Mr. Fico going out of the EU for Russia, he's got value while he is in. Because once we are legally out, we will be of much lesser value for him, because now we can keep the foot in the door and be the bias maker and do the troublemaking inside, which is of great value. So you're right in aiming there that Central Europe can turn into something which will be very pro-Russian. And if this is a trend of more extreme radical parties around the world, yes, it is. But again, I would turn into one. You may see populist parties, say in Italy, Meloni, the Northern League, quite populist nationalist parties, but that they keep at least some sanity in strategic things. They know that Putin is evil. We saw some other parties which may be weird, which may be extreme right parties, but they keep at least some decency and some strategic sanity that Putin is evil. Here, Robert Fico has got none of that, zero. But it's a part of overall trend. The only thing is problem that Slovakia might lack the strength of the institutions, state traditions, and internal resilience to resist this drive of Mr. Fico and might be more fragile. But even countries like United States will be heavily tested by crazy raid of Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and some crazy guys. We see what's happening there. And we spoke of the coup d'etat. I'm afraid that we see attempt for coup d'etat by smart means, even in the countries which are strongholds of parliamentarism, democratism in the world.
Thank you. And in addition to that, concerning Czech Republic, I saw a report this morning of an unofficial visit of the Hungarian foreign minister to Prague, not meeting the government officials, but meeting Andrej Babiš. So we see these links between Hungary, the Hungarian government, and the Czech opposition, as we saw before the
Let me say on this, because I'm biased. I was part on this. This was in spring 2023 when the same thing happened. I was calling in as a minister at the time a meeting of Visegrad 4, and Minister Lipavsky came, Zbigniew Rau came from Poland, and we were sitting in the place of our meeting, and Peter Szijjártó was late. He left us waiting. And we learned that he kept us waiting because he went for the press conference with opposition leader Mr. Fico, when he was praising him and he was trashing my government, which I was a member. And I got a hard time. I was thinking in my head, probably I should cancel the meeting and keep meeting only with other two ministers and say, Mr. Szijjártó, thank you very much for your visit, but we don't care seeing you. Those two persuaded me that, okay, let's go ahead. He was under heavy pressure by all three of us in the room. We felt offended. Frankly, it was heavily underestimated in Slovakia. When I publicly criticized Mr. Szijjártó that this is not something which is normal among behavior, among friends, allies, and good neighbors at all, well, I was very much lonely in the government. At the time, we heavily underestimated all of those signs and all of the coordinated effort of Russia, Hungary, and all authoritarians. I hope we will have learned the lesson, but I'm kind of a little bit skeptical that we learn the lesson when we already bleed and we have broken bones, and then we start to think why that happened. And I see it just happening live again in Czech Republic. At least government reacted stronger. Prime Minister Fiala protested. At the time when this was happening in Slovakia, I was very much lonely. Not the prime minister, not the government, not the president took it as an offense, and which was wrong.
We have a bit less than 1 minute left officially, but maybe it will be a bit longer. I would ask Juraj as a last question. So we spoke a lot about Putin, Russia, but what about Trump and Slovakia, Trump and the far right? Because we have a few questions about it, and I think it has to be also covered today. So if you can give your point of view on that quickly, Juraj, please. Even if it's a big topic in itself.
Yeah, I mean, just Fico felt quite emboldened he celebrated a victory of Trump, but I think it's quite erroneous thinking of these autocrats all around Europe to think of Trump as their president. It's not their president. It's president of the United States that has adopted revisionist, almost imperialist rhetoric, going against the institutions on which we all depend. A small country like Slovakia, imagine a world without NATO, without the EU, without everything that also US supported, and now US is withdrawing. It's detrimental to us. It may produce some personal advantages for people like Fico or Orban, but I think they shouldn't celebrate it. And I don't. They see themselves as sort of international avant-garde. I see this going to more conflictual relations. So Slovakia produces the most cars per capita in the world. If Trump imposes tariffs on the EU, it will also impact ours. So where is your president now? Yeah, so I wouldn't be so happy about it. And I think that people like Trump, as we had the meeting yesterday actually at the DPC, and there was an interesting thought there that they want to make people like us and that cherish liberal democracy sort of a structural minority, and they want to unravel the international liberal order. I think it will be harmful to all of us.
Well, that will be the final word. Thank you very much to all, Juraj, Katarína, Batková, Mr. Káčer, and even Novotny at the start of this discussion. I think it was very interesting and also for awareness of what is happening in the country and in the EU. Thank you very much. Thank you to our audience for the questions, and see you soon for another EPC event. Have a good day.
Thank you. Have a nice day. Thank you for the invite.
Bye. Thank